On today's show, we have Nina Schuyler, who is a local author who is publishing her newest book in this ravishing world. I'm so excited to hear more about your book and how it's been, the project itself. But thank you for being with us. I'm going to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting to be here and to meet both of you. So in this ravishing world, how did it come to be? It won 2 awards. So part of the process of getting a short story collection, you also often submit it to contests. So, and part of the contest, the reward is to have a little money or give you a little money and then publish it. So it won the W.S. Porter Prize and, important to me, the Prism Prize for Climate Literature.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Why is that relevant to you, the Prism Prize particularly?
Because I really set out to do something for climate change. And especially during the pandemic, we were shelter in place, and the only refuge, the only sanctuary was nature. And that really, I have 2 children, we'd walk around the block, we'd go hiking in the hills, and that brought some relief. And it was always, well, what can I do? What can I give back to nature? And because I'm a writer, it's like, well, why don't I put together a collection in some way and tell stories about climate crisis and the response to the climate crisis from different points of view. So I really set out to, the earth has given me so much and nature fills me with such awe. What could I do for nature?
Wow, very cool. So these short stories that are in your book, are they fiction, nonfiction, or how is that?
They're all fiction.
Oh, okay.
But a lot of them, for example, there's one character, Jake, who is a note taker at UC Berkeley. And I had a friend that would take notes for students who didn't want to go to the class. So he'd attend all these classes and take notes. And so I gave Jake, this fictional character, that job because I thought it was so interesting. And, he studied everything. This man I knew, it's like he was so well-versed in biology, philosophy, sociology, because that's what he did. He took notes. So he'd go to the class because the student didn't want to go, and then he'd give the students, they paid for it, give them the notes. And then he attends one class where one of the characters in the book shows up, Eleanor. She's an environmental economist, and she's telling the class basically the dire facts of the earth and what's happening, the collapse of ecosystems, and he just can't get it out of his head. Like, it changes his life fundamentally. Like, I can no longer do this work anymore because I am now, it's like an itch I can't get rid of. I can't stop thinking about it. So one thing I did is that Eleanor, who's kind of a main character, weaves in and out through the collection. So we open with her, and then, she travels
through the story. Okay, so each of these short stories are kind of interconnected.
Yeah, interconnected, exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
And they're all revolving. If you think of a picture, the axis is climate change or the climate crisis at this point, and these characters are revolving around that axis from different points and responses to this issue.
Okay. And what are some of the, I guess, the climate crisis issues that you kind of focus on? Because I know there's kind of various issues in that.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to hear kind of on some of those that you touch on, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the big thing I did is, we can talk about it later and why I did it, but I gave nature a voice. So nature itself, or the earth, is a character and has a voice. And it's often coming up or giving the reader facts of how human activity has changed even the way the earth rotates, if you can believe it. Like, all our activity has changed the rotation of the earth, and it's moving at a different pace at this point. But I have another character, Ava, who's Eleanor's daughter, who is a scientist working on developing a bacteria to eat the plastic, because we have so much plastic. And this is actually going on. Scientists are trying to develop bacteria that can eat it even faster to try to get rid of plastic.
Oh, so I'm really, really like not very knowledgeble on a lot of these environmental studies or environmental experiments that are done. But that's interesting. So you're saying that right now there's bacteria that's able to just eat plastic waste and,
Yeah.
and kind of spin it up that way.
Yeah, the bacteria adapted. They changed what they could eat, essentially, and began to eat. The scientists discovered they can eat plastic and digest it and get rid of it.
I did not know that.
So scientists are trying to speed up the process of the bacteria and how much it can eat. But they're not sure, scientists are not sure they can do it, so they're also considering a synthetic bacteria based on their organic bacteria to do this process. Now it'll just be one of many ways to address the plastic problem.
Gotcha.
What type of research? Because it sounds like you have so much information. Did you do to create your stories? Because it sounds like it's more on climate change. So what research did you do?
Well, every character has a different profession. So Ava, I did a lot of research on the internet. The internet's full of information. You just have to check, what's the source? Where am I getting this information? Is it credible? So I read about the scientific studies about bacteria and then said, well, Ava will be doing this. And at the same time, she's struggling with whether to have a child or not. So those people who are on the front lines of climate crisis, or they're scientists in biology or ecology, they are on the front lines or the front seat, and they know everything that's going on. They can't not know. They can't erase it. So she's grappling with whether to have a child, and they're having trouble having children. So she's doing in vitro fertilization. So I had to research that. And that, again, I have some friends that have done it, but there's a lot of stuff on the internet to just poke around.
Interesting.
And for context, what is the audience for the book?
Probably adult or,
Your target audience, that's the word.
Yeah, my target audience.
I couldn't think of it.
Probably adult or, older, in high school.
Okay.
I could see, someone, I know they teach science classes and their specialty science classes in high school. This would be a good book. I also had a friend who's a ecologist go through the book and make sure my scientific facts are right.
Oh, I see.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's great that you had someone fact check.
Everything. Yeah. And, I couldn't believe she did it, but everything, and she backed it up with documentation. So I have a file, everything, I'm not sure this is right. So at one point, for example, nature, who's been around for, let's say, since the beginning of Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago, I go through what's called deep time from the very beginning to now. What appeared in the evolution, from, water and the oceans to first plant life to, first single organism. So I go through because nature's thinking about all the steps that we got to the Homo sapien, us.
Yeah.
But it's all based on a fossil record. So it's a little fuzzy. Okay, maybe the first single cell amoeba appeared around here. They're not sure, right? Because it's all fossils. But she at least checked the range I was using. Because we're so immersed in misinformation now. I didn't want to have any false facts.
Right. And that's the big thing. Especially when writing a book and a story collection on something that you did a lot of research on to make sure that everything was factual. That's so important, super important, because you don't want to be held accountable or held accountable for for not being accurate. But that's great. I mean, that's awesome that you had a friend that works in this field and was able to fact check for you.
Well, I've talked to her a lot. She's a friend, and so she also and a couple other friends that are scientists inspired me to write this book because they said information isn't working. We say all, species extinction, water rising, temperature rising, but nobody's changing their behavior. We need stories that create meaning for people.
I see.
They empathize and will change. So it's well, maybe I could try it to write the story or write a story.
I can see that. What was your process like? Your writing process like for this book? How does that look like for you? Or what did that look like for you?
Well, I started with Eleanor. So she's you have nature first, and then you have Eleanor, and she's the environmental economist that wins the Goldman Environmental Prize. And that's a big prize in the Bay Area. And so they honor environmentalists that have done great work, but she doesn't want the prize because her lifelong work has come to this, and it isn't where she wanted it to be. She wanted to have solved a lot of things. But I wrote about 50 pages from her point of view and said, it can't be just from one point of view because the climate crisis is probably the hardest thing humanity is facing. And I need to have a lot more voices because it's going to be collective action. It's not going to be a hero comes and saves us. And most Western stories are a hero's journey, right? That one person that comes along and I've solved it. So it's not going to work in this case. It's going to be so many points of entry to try to solve it, and people joining organizations and saying, enough, we have to get off fossil fuel.
Awesome. So did you start writing this book like in 2020, 2021?
Probably about 2020 when the pandemic hit.
Okay.
So I was still teaching. I was teaching online. We all went to Zoom, remember? So at the time I was teaching in the MFA program for University of San Francisco.
Oh, nice.
But I drive in and drive back. And because the relief was to be out in nature, that's when I started. And I thought, this is the time to try to do something. And the other thing that really inspired me is I was really upset or looking at how the world was responding to the pandemic.
Yeah.
And we didn't pull together, right? There were countries Africa went without the vaccine for so long. So all the rich countries got the COVID vaccine, and all the poorer countries did not. And to me, the pandemic was like a test run. How are we going to handle climate change? Because it's a global.
I didn't even think about that.
No, it's true though. I think about that all the time too, is like living in a post-pandemic world now. It's just, you really saw a lot of people's true colors come out.
Really did.
And in those 3 years, basically, I mean, it rolled into 2022 as well. It's just, to me, it was just wild seeing how separated it made a lot of people, and still makes people separated to this day.
Yeah.
Like it's a huge event, but that's really interesting the way you describe that. It's like the way we handle this situation will be kind of shows how people will handle the climate crisis.
This is it.
Yeah.
And there's still climate deniers.
Yes,
like,
there are.
Like, how could that possibly be? But if we looked at the pandemic and the divisiveness, like no one's going to tell me what to do. Well, you're going to hear that with climate change. Like, I remember meeting this guy a long time ago. It's like, and we were trying to conserve water. Remember, we were in the drought in California. It's like, nobody's going to tell me how to use water. It's like, well, what about the community? It's not just about you. Right? We all have to work together to solve this. But he was so adamant, like, I'm a hard worker. I do my job. No one's going to tell me what to do. So in this country, in the United States, there's such an individual rights movement. Like, you can't tell me to put a mask on. You can't tell me to turn my sprinklers off. So, we saw that.
Yeah, you see, like, people just don't like authority. And I understand. Like, I'm, growing up as someone with not a lot of resources, it's really hard to find trust in a lot of, especially what the government does. And to me, I mean, I've always had an issue with authority as well. Yeah. But I mean, there's just certain things with, I'm a big believer in like research and science and facts, just hard facts. I don't like just being told by someone like, oh, this is what's going to happen. And that's it. That's what you need to believe. Like, no, I want to believe it for myself. Right. So I do my own research, and I make my own decision based on the research that I do.
I find that rarer and rarer.
Well, most people aren't going to do that. Most people are just going to want to say what they hear on the news or well, the news is a whole other thing. That's all that kind of work.
It's not really news anymore. It's like opinions.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Did you want to add?
No, I was going to say, I always start with a no. It's beautiful. We've talked about activism, and we've talked about different forms of how that looks like on the show before. And to me, activism can look not just holding, a poster and going to protest. It can also be through art. Many graphic designers design certain posters and flyers to be put out everywhere as a form of using their skills and talent to protest in a way.
Yeah.
Or advocate, and one other form is writing as well, writing stories. And I'm making connections through my head as well for our youth in the community that, you can, if you have talent, writing, and you believe something so deep, in this case climate change, you can write stories about it. Maybe others don't see the truth by presenting
it might
them
be hard. Yeah, it might be hard
presenting, like I'll explain it this way. I'm a very visual, hands-on learner. If you present me with pure data presentation, but I don't physically work on it, my brain has a harder time making that connection to learn. It's not that I can't learn it. It just takes me a longer process. Yeah. So for many, it might be easier for them to process climate change, environmental awareness through storytelling. So I love how you made that connection. I wouldn't have thought about that, earlier. I'm like, oh, but it's true. You can make that connection and kind of seeing what's around us. The COVID really did hit home.
Yeah,
it hit
everybody.
home for many, to our environment. It was crazy for me to see on social media, a lot of like the natural nature of all the animals coming out when we were all in, right?
Yeah.
So it was really interesting for me to see that, especially
I didn't really see that, really. So
Yes,
because
yeah.
more people were inside.
Like coyotes walking down the street.
Yeah, because there was
Even
no
New York
human.
City.
Yeah, in New York City,
Wow.
Florida, even I think California. A lot of because of the chaos of what we're doing every single day, there isn't room for nature to kind of, because we co-live here. It's always been that way. I think it should always be that way, keeping in mind that this is our home, but not just like for humans. We co-share this place with with plants, animals, and everything. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, in one of my stories, I have a ballet dancer. So that's the son of Eleanor. So remember, Eleanor's kind of weaving in and out. Ed is her son, and he's doing kind of an art performance for climate change, and he's trying to become a rat. So to think and dance how a rat would be on stage. So the rat is there, and another dancer is a cat. So the whole story is about, can they achieve the consciousness of a rat and a cat and make something happen on the stage? And the thinking behind that is that we're so prone to human exceptionalism, like humans are the smartest beings around. And yet the research I did on rats, they're really smart and they have a lot of skill. So my character, Ed, had to get out of rats are dirty, bad, or whatever, and start thinking and read about rats and all that they can do to become the rat. Now, whether you'll have to decide if you read the story, did he do it or not? There's kind of a question at the end, did he achieve it or not? But that was trying to present a story that there's other intelligence out there that needs to be recognized. It's not just humans' intelligence, and that's the standard. So more and more, we're discovering through science that other beings have intelligence. Like now, I read I belong to a lot of eco news sites. Elephants have names for each other. So they're using artificial intelligence to look for patterns in the sounds that they make and then correlate with visuals. So the sound that they make and then the response of an elephant, they've now discovered that elephants call each other certain names. Now, without this scientific study or technology, it's like, you think they're just, making these wailing sounds, right?
Yeah.
But no. So if they have names for each other, it means that they have some kind of consciousness that we've undervalued or said didn't exist even. So I wanted to put that in the book there, that it, like you said, that there has to be room for all kinds of beings, not just that humans are exceptional and they should decide everything and ruin habitats.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you with that. I'm really big on, because I grew up in Guatemala in a small town. We were always surrounded by nature, and we grew our own crops and everything. So I think because I grew up in that environment, there's this deep down inside me. There's always this love of animals and protection, and but the more I grow, the more I keep hearing about the animals that are in risk of extinction, right?
Yeah.
And many of the causes of that is because of us.
Right.
And it's sad to hear. One of them being the monarch butterfly that is in it's on red right now. Red flag that they're going to be extinct, and it's due to the deforestation, especially in Mexico, right? The illegal deforestation that's going on there, due to plantation of avocados that we Americans buy. So stuff like that. And once you learn more, especially for me, again, I'm very visual, so I like to learn through stories and films, and that has helped me to understand a little bit more, and that has ultimately made me choose different paths on what I purchase and what I do in my life. And again, not everybody will understand and not everybody will agree maybe, but I think for me is when I read stories or when I watch films, they help me decide at the end of the day what I can do to support and help these beautiful creatures, because again, this is their home as well.
Yeah.
So
I remember reading in 1970, you probably don't remember, but a record came out, and I remember my parents playing it a lot. It was songs from the humpback whale. So science. Just they tape recorded underwater the sounds the humpback whales were making.
It's really interesting.
I've heard recordings of these.
Yeah, like the haunting sounds of the
they
whale.
Sound really interesting. Yeah.
But what happened after that became really popular. It was one of the most best-selling natural recordings out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that the public then demanded stop killing the whales. So in a way, learning that the whales sang to each other, we had empathy.
Yeah.
Like, wait a minute, we're killing these creatures that know how to sing to each other. And how can we be doing that? So using story, or like they have their own way of being underwater, we need to protect them. And it led the regulation that
and that actually brings up a point that I've heard a lot from a lot of people when it comes to when we're talking about like human rights. One thing that gets brought up to me and I see is like people tend to have more empathy for, like, let's say that there's a homeless dog. They have way more empathy for the homeless dog than a homeless person, like a homeless human being.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just kind of always been like that. Like people just tend to lean more on empathy towards animals, towards actual humans themselves when it comes to rights. You know what I mean? But it's true.
It's that's fascinating, because it's almost like it's too close for comfort or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people have trouble thinking about climate change because it's such a big issue and it feels so terrifying. And looking at a homeless person, it's like, well, that could be me. I mean, it's a human being on the ground. It's like, I better look away because I'm feeling so much need to help. I can't, but I don't want to help, and I'm going to feel helpless.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I can help the dog, give him a little food or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But
yeah, since we're talking a little bit about kind of the challenges that we're seeing and witnessing in our world right now, what was the most challenging part of writing each plot? Because there's, how many shorts are there?
I think there's 9 or 10. I keep going back and forth.
Okay.
I think there's 10 points of view. Someone said there's 11. I said, where did you get 11?
It's like, what?
I mean, so in with that, what was the most challenging part of writing the plots that you encountered?
The most challenging part was the voice of nature.
Ooh.
Because when I first started writing, nature was so angry. Like, I can't believe you've done this to me. It's like, well, that's not right, because nature the motivation for nature being in this book, it's trying to get humans to listen. And most people don't want to be just yelled at. So I had to write and write to get that nuanced voice, like a full range, a full note of the sound of the nature to make it okay for the human ear. So I struggled with that voice, and my early readers were like, I don't know. I don't know if this is going to work. And I almost tossed it. It's like, no, if I need to do this because people need to feel something for nature, like to embody nature, at least through a voice in some way. So that was the toughest. And that voice weaves in and out. And it's the first voice you meet when you open the book.
Well, speaking of you changing the tone of nature, what were like parts that you didn't include in the stories? I'm kind of curious, or changes that you made,
like in the drafts. Like,
yeah. Because I mean, that's a huge one. Changing the tone.
The tone, yeah,
of nature.
And that's just playing and trying to intuit, is this the right voice? So you'll hear in writing classes, it's all in revision. So it's never the first draft. This is probably 10 revisions.
Yeah.
Right? You go over and over and feel it. You have to feel everything, because that's your...
What does that mean when you say feel?
You have to become... It's like an actor. You have to become these characters. So otherwise, it's the author above the character telling you about the character, versus I am in this tight and feeling, the Ava, the scientist, really struggling to get this bacteria to work. So we call it narrative distance. So I really want to collapse the narrative distance and make the reader feel, I have to feel the character like an actor. But I don't like being on stage. So I'd prefer to hide behind a book than, become the actor. But so I've had to, there's a woman here, Lucinda, who volunteers essentially at the Marin Humane Society and prefers dogs to all humans, just wants to spend all her time with abandoned dogs and socialize them. So, I went up there. My husband used to volunteer there, so I've spent a lot of time there and just watch the dogs and people interact with them. And how do you socialize a dog? But I have to become Lucinda to do it, to feel it.
One thing I think we missed in the beginning of the show is talking a little bit about who you are. So you're an author, but you also teach creative writing, correct? Do you want to share a little bit about that? Because I think it's super important for people to know that this isn't your first book. You've written different, or is it your first book?
No, there's 3 novels
That's
before
what
this.
That's what I remember. Yeah. So there's multiple writing pieces that you've done, and I think for the audience to kind of be like, oh, to hear your experience, I'd love for you to talk about, your teaching part and how many other books you've done.
Okay. So I taught for, I think, 16 years at the University of San Francisco in what's called the MFA program, Master of Fine Arts. So the students have gotten their undergraduate degree, decided I love to write, I'm going to go get this MFA. So I taught students long fiction, we call it long fiction novel writing, short stories, flash fiction. Flash fiction is 1,000 words or less. So all these different, essentially links, and depending on the link is how much compression you have to use, like how tight it has to be. So I did that work with students. That was really 16 years of helping students realize their dream of becoming a writer and how to get better. And I'm one that believes you can teach writing. There's kind of a debate. Can you teach someone to write? And it's like, yes, you can. Will they be a New York Times bestseller? I don't know that.
Yeah,
but I could teach you, some basic rules to help you manifest, these characters on the page.
Yeah. And just to add, I mean, growing up, I've actually really always loved like writing. And it's something that, so here's kind of my journey with writing. So as a kid, I remember there used to be these book contests where basically the teacher would present to us. I remember I was in 3rd grade. The teacher would present to us like a book and would present, each book just had like a illustration and we had to create a story
Oh, that's
out of that
neat.
illustration. I think it was probably something done through Scholastic or something like that. But basically what we would do is we would just get like a printout of the illustrations, and then it's like make a story out of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I love
And I
that.
love doing that as a kid.
Yeah.
Like I love doing, like I did 2 of those because I like doing it so much, and my imagination was like
Yeah.
rampant. I remember I think in my story, but the thing was like, also at the time I was like really into writing about, like I was really into Star Wars.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I was really into like writing kind of like sci-fi type of stuff,
Yeah.
or like really, and then it was just like, it was enjoyable, you know, like I never found it really tough to like come up with like like scenarios or an idea right in my mind. And then that carried on through middle school and especially high school. I had some great English teachers in high school. And I always looked forward to all the creative writing stuff because I like doing that more than like a research paper.
Yeah, me too.
Or doing stuff like that. Like that's way too much research. Like again, it's so much information you have to take in, but with creative writing, it's like you're free to kind
Yeah,
of
that's
do
it.
what and create your own world. So again, it's like storytelling, right? So
Yeah.
so it's like I really got to like tell my own story through these
Yeah.
whatever scenarios I did. Like anyways, but what kind of ruined it for me was when I got to San Francisco State University. I took a what is it, like a research? It's called GWAR. That was the acronym for it. But it was basically like it was a graduation requirement. You had to basically look and have like research an entire like research paper thing. But it was all in not MLA. It was in the other really annoying formats. Do you know all the formats? MLA.
Not off that. I tried to get out of that world. Like,
Well, unfortunately,
You had to do it.
I had to do that, and I
Wow.
remember it just screwed up my writing. Like I can't. I think because of that class, because it was literally like a format where okay, if you're gonna say a fact or something, you need to back it up with like 3-4 sentences after. Right, or something
Oh,
like
yeah,
that. Like
yeah.
And you also have to put in like the little number of what source you're using. You need to
like footnoted or
yeah
something.
footnote
like,
it and stuff.
Yeah.
It was awful.
But that
awful.
Now you're not in the imaginative world,
Right, but
I mean, you're
I'm not
completely out
in
of
that.
it.
I'm not in that world, and it really screwed up the rest of my, like I hate writing now.
Oh, no.
Because of that. That class literally ruined my
Wow.
my love and creative drive for writing. But it's okay because I found my creative drive through audio and video now. So
Yeah.
that's how I'm
Yeah.
able to be creative. But I just find it. I mean, yeah. I mean, I could probably take a creative writing class
Yeah.
at some point, and because what I want to get into is like script writing, like
Yeah.
writing for like movies and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Because that would be really cool. It's a skill I definitely want to brush up on, and I hope that maybe that can kind of reignite
Yeah.
my passion for like writing stuff again, because when I just kind of try writing on my own and stuff, it's just I just can't like that
No.
class really, and the teacher was really hard on me, like not just on me but everyone. Like it was super strict about all the things, and it was just like it traumatized me.
Yeah.
I had to let that out because it's the only time I'd be able to really share that. But that's something that I've always kind of struggled with, unfortunately, ever since going to SF State.
It's amazing how important teachers are.
Oh yeah.
Whether they encourage or they stifle. But just for you, because I want you to keep writing, like you got in the world of nonfiction and like a research paper. So if you're doing footnotes and everything, you're out of the world of the imagination and fiction and creating. So I hope you find your way back in. I think that the pleasure of it is that you're so surprised at what comes out of you. Right?
Yeah. I remember
Really?
like being like myself. I would write and I would think of these scenarios, and then like because in my head, like when I was writing too, I listened to a lot of music. Like music also helps me really get inspiration and stuff. And I think a lot of artists can relate to that. It's just being able to write, create these scenarios, put them on, and to me it did help. Yeah, it helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, just how much you have absorbed and how much you're far more than you think you are.
Right.
In terms of your imaginative ability.
But what I also want to bring up is that Santi has written a book herself.
Oh, that's what it is.
This is we've been waiting for this.
That is what I also want to lead into.
Let's hear about it.
Oh yeah, well, kind of similar. I think you kind of brushed on it when I'm I wasn't born here. My family, we came here, and our native language is Quiche. It's a Mayan language from Guatemala. So that's our first language for like most of my family. Spanish is our second, I would say. We kind of learned Spanish here. If I speak Spanish, I don't have the Guatemalan accent. I have kind of like a mixture of whatever I learned in Marin County. But when I came here, I've had a really hard time transitioning from leaving my native language to speaking Spanish and English. That was really hard on me. I remember, going to doctor's visits, me speaking in Quiche, and my mom had to say, no, you have to speak in Spanish and English. And she made me watch all the movies in English, music in English, read in English. And I had a really hard time. I was really frustrated because in a way at school, I also didn't like it because there was no way for me to communicate very well. And again, I come from a very different culture. I come from, from even the food, so that I had a really hard time fitting in. And I felt like the kids as well, they didn't connect with me. And that made me feel really bad in a way. So part of Scholastic, I think it was. It might have not, but I don't remember exactly how it happened. My third grade teacher, Miss Bartholomew, she had a project saying, hey, I want you guys to write a moral story. But you have to use animals to kind of explain the moral. And I decided to write about what I was going through as a kid. And I think growing up now, I'm like, there was an inner child in me that was hurting. And I think that was my way of kind of explaining what was going on. Yeah. And it was taking, an eagle and a parrot. Mm-hmm. And I chose an eagle because it's America, the eagle. Yeah. And a parrot it was my favorite bird during that time, and I said I could be the parrot. And I've learned that parrots can kind of talk in a way. Mm-hmm. So I created the story where the eagle can talk so many languages, and it showed off in front of the parrot about I can speak 3 languages, but you can't. And the parrot struggled. But I used animals kind of in the forest to explain how being kind is important, being patient is important, and eventually, the moral of the story is be kind, be nice, and don't show off. That's the title of my book. The title of my book is Don't Show Off, because that's so important to me, because I think it's so easy for us to show off in front of people, but at the end of the day, you never know what struggles you're having. And then I fell in love with writing. So for me, I fell in love with writing. It's been so I'm asking you a little bit of questions about kind of your processes and what you do for writing. I took creative writing in high school because I struggled so much in English. I had to work extra hard than a lot of my peers learning English. And then, but it was interesting because I was always at the bottom. Like my English level was always at the bottom. To me, it was embarrassing. But growing up now, I'm like, you can't expect me to be at the same level. But I took AP Lit. Wow. And I learned about poetry, and I fell in love with poems. And but I did stop writing. I went through a life during the pandemic and certain stuff in my life that I lost my teacher. He passed away very unexpected. And he helped me publish my book. Oh my God. Yeah, he helped me. He was kind of like the editor in a way. Wow. Yeah. And but with that being said, I want to ask you, if you have a creator's block, how do you handle that? Yeah. What do you do with your experience of writing?
Well, first of all, it's just so cool that you love that book and you created it. And there's something about moving it into story, like transforming your story and moving it into this other story that's very healing. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, just and to manifest essentially the inner struggle that you were going through and put it on the page. And so it's outside of you. There's something about that process that's healing. So I just want to acknowledge that you did that. And it's even at that young age, we're, figuring that out and able to do it. So I write every day, even if it's a little thing. Yeah. Oh. So I carry around a little. I even have it on the desk here. And
wow.
just write, even if it's not going to end up anywhere, I'm always like, what had happened today? What am I feeling?
Oh, interesting.
And I feel like it's a little room, like my own little room that I go to just to reflect about the world, about what's going on inside me. So I'm constantly, even if I'm waiting to pick up a child from school or something, I'll take 10 minutes and write something down. So that sometimes they turn into stories or help with a character, but I'll see something and write it down. Your job, I was saying it before we went on the air, is such good fodder for stories because you're encountering so many different people and different stories. So long ago, I started out as a writer, as a newspaper reporter for
So journalism?
journalism.
Yeah.
And it was an outward looking, not an inward looking, meaning I had to go interview people. And you do too. You have to really listen and feel it and respond, right? There's a real art to it. And I find most people don't have it. This listen, respond, versus just like you said, show off or talk about yourself. And there's never any question
There's no
about
substance to what's being said.
right. Or no one asks you anything.
Right.
Like you say something and there's no follow-up.
They're just like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, moving on.
Yeah.
And I'll bring it back to me. So being the newspaper reporter really trained me or taught me how to listen and become different characters and feel it. And then if I didn't know, ask questions. So there's another character, I'm trying to think of who else that I had to interview, someone in technology. He's a coder. So it's like, well, what do you do? And just being okay to say, I don't know. And can you explain it to me? And it's often the most basic things that you want to understand. Like you wanted to go back and like ask me, well, how did you become a writer? Or like, how do you do this? Those are basic things, but they're fundamental. So anyway, you're well suited to write stories and then collect, just carry around a notebook and don't judge it like, oh, this better be good, or I hope I use this. It's just kind of a practice. I view it as a practice.
I think it's just so cool, just being able to hear your perspective on writing and kind of just the different ways, like, because again, like our writing is an art, so there's very different ways of doing it as well,
right.
or different, or like, creative ways in which it's done. So for example, like lyricists for like, people who create songs, these rappers or like a lot of these artists that you find nowadays, they actually don't write their own music. They have,
Really?
Yeah, no, they have this. It's a term that's been used for the past like 5-6 years now, as ghost writers. So ghost writers are basically people who write the songs for them, but their credits are nowhere on the song.
Wow.
The credits are only for the artist. So a lot of these pop songs that you hear, and there's a lot of artists who have admitted to it. They're saying like, "Oh no, I don't write my own music. I just hire someone to write it for me."
Wow.
And it's a huge industry of ghostwriters.
Wow.
And it's just, and I just find that fascinating.
Yeah.
Now that they're just able to do that.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I mean, that's just kind of where artists and pop culture is kind of heading, is just like, it's always about what's face first, face value. What do you get, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really hard. That's why I think it's also hard to find more genuine artists in today's age than it was before.
Yeah.
Just because, again, about this ghostwriter phenomenon that's going on.
Yeah.
But it's also, I mean, so I also, I've also worked on music before, and I think the hardest part about music to me has always been actually lyrics, like just coming up with lyrics and actually trying to tell a story through words to make it like flow or interesting, or like, or does it work? Because when it comes to music, there's so many ways, because you can have like really bad lyrics, but if the talent is good, or if the person singing it is good, they can actually make it really compelling, right?
Yeah.
That's the really magical thing about music there.
Right. And often you don't even know what the words are.
Right.
Because they're so slurred or whatever.
Right.
It's like you're just listening to the notes. But then I want to go back to, your love of poetry. A lot of the lyrics are poetry. It's poetry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Poetry,
it's
yes.
poetry.
You know,
and there's an art to it. Like
Yeah.
I didn't know how many types of poetry there are, right?
Yeah.
There's different forms.
Right.
I don't know if I asked you this in the beginning, but what got you into writing in the first place? Not this book, but in general, what got you into writing?
Yeah. Well, I was always a reader. an avid reader. And forever, I was really intimidated. Like, there's no way I can write. Because what I read was astounding, amazing. And I just would marvel. The one thing when I look at journals I always kept some kind of diary journal throughout my life, is I'd collect sentences that I loved. It's like, oh, look at, Virginia Woolf, she wrote this sentence. I'm going to copy it down. So when I look at even though, I was writing my own thoughts and feelings, these sentences from other works are in there because I just marvel at them.
Oh, so you get like, it's the same thing with like influence. So you're like influence. It's the same thing with music. Like people will listen to certain chords or certain like melodies, and then they get inspiration from that.
That's
put it in their song. Same. Yeah, it's very similar. Wow.
Yeah. And then, cool. So I was a newspaper reporter, and you probably know this, in a newspaper report, in a story, there's a structure to it. Like it's the lead, right? So who, what, where, when, why is the top. And then the next paragraph is, well, you can elaborate a little more. And then the next one. So you design it in this shape so that if they only have so much room, they can cut it. Like we don't really need that last paragraph. But writing in that tight form for a newspaper, a lot of stuff gets left out.
Oh, yeah.
So then I turn that into stories. Like I meet this interesting character, human person. It's like, oh, and they'd stay with me and I'd start making up stories about them. A little bit like your picture. Like look at a picture. I'd meet someone. It's like, well, none of that made it in this newspaper article because it doesn't fit, but he's staying with me, or she is.
There's still substance there. There's still a story to be told.
A story to be told that's not going to fit the newspaper, but it could in fiction if I just invent. So that was my first thing. And then at night, after newspaper reporting, I'd take classes at UC Berkeley Extension. So that was my beginning, like going to night class. And then I did end up at San Francisco State and got an MFA there.
Nice.
So I'd work full-time at the newspaper and then go to night classes.
Yeah.
Usually one a night because I was so tired, just working full-time.
Oh, wow. You guys talked about like influences. Are there any authors that have influenced you or in your work?
Yeah, I write a newsletter about, it's called Stunning Sentences.
Oh,
so I'm really affected by language. And so I read kind of the high stylists. Toni Morrison is amazing, Virginia Woolf. But I keep going back to them and it's almost like I'll read their work almost like poetry before I start writing to feel the rhythms again and the sounds and to raise my way of writing, like to elevate it. Like, okay.
Oh, you have quite the following here on Stunning Sentences. Wow. Yeah, you do. Yeah, there's a lot of people interacting here, it seems.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Where?
It's on ninaschuyler.substack.com. Yeah.
What is that?
It's my newsletter about stunning sentences.
Oh, okay.
So you can sign up for free. I send out a stunning sentence every week and take it apart. I analyze it and then tell you how to write it. Like, okay, start with, a subject and now add this and this. This is what that sentence just did, the architecture of it.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah. So, long ago, right? Back when I was 10 and 11, I was collecting sentences. Well, I'm still
That's so interesting.
You're like, I'm still collecting.
Yeah, you're still collecting sentences. But
wow.
It's so cool.
I don't collect, vases. I collect sentences.
I just, and it's just so unique. Like I said, I've never heard of anyone really doing something like that, but it's cool and it makes sense. Like it's really great for really honing in your craft.
Yeah,
and like you're saying, influences, right?
Right, influence and read widely. I'm always, try this writer. So pick up the book. It's like, oh yeah, there's a lot of style, and then looking at the sentences and taking them apart. And I always want to share it with someone. So that's why I started this. Like, oh, you have to learn how to do this too. So,
wow, this is so awesome.
Yeah,
I'm really enjoying this. Because of time, I do want to get for anyone who's like listening, who has envision of publishing. You said, with winning the book winning a prize, you were able to have a little bit of money. What does a publishing look like?
What's the publishing process like?
Exactly.
So like, okay, let's say I know. So it probably starts with drafts, right?
Yeah.
What do you do after you kind of get some drafts done, or how? Or okay, let's even start from there.
Okay.
What happens after?
Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, and you do you do a first draft and then you revise and you revise. And then hopefully I belong to a writer's group and I give them the manuscript and say, can you read it and give me comments?
What's a writer's group?
Like a group of writers that are writing too, and you exchange material.
Oh, I see.
It's almost like you make your own workshop. Like, okay, it's your turn to give us work on, in 2 weeks. So you have a deadline. So
I think I know what you're talking about, because I used to work at Starbucks like 3-4 years ago now, and we actually used to have this writers. We used to have like these group of ladies who would come in every Thursday or something like that, and they would come in and they would like write for the entire day.
So that's it.
And they'd give each other feedback and stuff.
That's it. So you can form your own writers group. Now, this is what an MFA or MA, a Master's of Arts, would give you, like a collectivity of writers, but you can form it. Like, I really want to write. I wanted to bring up a lot of people I know, or they mentioned to me, it's meetup.com.
Yeah, that's where I think they also had their group, the Starbucks group I was talking about earlier. That's where they all met up, was through some website like that.
It's meetup.com. You can form, like, I'm a writer and I want to form a group of writers that meets, once a week or whatever.
It's a bit different than a book club.
Yeah, but you're all writing. You're quiet, hopefully.
Okay.
So I get them to read it and give me feedback, and they'll probably revise again, because I'm the only one that's looked at it. I need someone else to look at it. And then you send it out and hopefully find an agent for it. So an agent is like the mediary between your work and the publishing industry. So it's a literary agent. And there's websites for that, querytracker.com and agentquery.com. Those are two. And then there's, I think, manuscriptwishlist.com or something. So they're online, and you can... I would recommend sending the manuscript out. Let's say you wrote a short story collection. Let's say you wrote a novel. So send it out to 7 agents at a time and say, and they always have like send 10 pages or send 20 pages, and then I'll ask for the full manuscript.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Yeah, if I want to read it. And so you need, in most cases, you need an agent to represent you out in the publishing industry, because they have the contacts. Like, oh, I know the editor at this publishing house. I'll send it to them. They might like it. So that's usually the process. There are some littler publishing houses that publish without an agent, and then you go directly to them and send your work. So the short story collection, I entered into contests, so I didn't need an agent. I just entered the contest. And I entered 10. So a lot of writers, it's like, oh, I'll give it to 2 agents. It's like, no, because it takes them a while. You want to give it to 7 or 10 so that more people are reading it. And there's a chance someone will represent you, or you'll win a contest and get published.
Gotcha.
So then that's how it gets published. How does that look like when it comes to publishing? Curiosity with more on the financial side, I would say. When you publish it, how does that work for a writer? Do you sell your script, or do you get royalties? How does that work?
So usually the traditional structure is they give you an advance. So they give you a chunk of money based on what they think the book is going to do. It's going to do well.
How long it's going to sell.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And then they have to earn back the advance before you get royalties. So let's say they paid you $10,000 for your book. It's like... Okay. The publishing company has to earn back the $10,000 before you earn royalties on it, and the royalties can be anywhere from 10 to 50%. So, this is not something you go into if you want to make a lot of money. You just don't. I mean, this is like you love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Passion. I had a question because when I thought, in a way, that some people were selling their scripts, but that's why I asked kind of like the clarity of how that looks like, the process of it, and how it looks like for anyone who is curious on publishing their own book.
Right.
What that will more of like, oh, this is what it's supposed to happen and how it looks like.
That's to publish that, but then you can write little short stories, right? And there's a lot of journals out there that will publish it. You could make $50 or $100 or nothing, but at least you're getting published. And there's something to be said about that because you build confidence, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like,
You mentioned feedback earlier. I wanted to ask you, what is the most interesting feedback you've ever gotten?
well, like one reader thought nature didn't work at all. So it's like, you have to stand up for yourself. It's like, no, I believe in this. It may not be working yet, but I'm not going to give up. Versus just like, oh, okay, I'll rip it out.
That's great, because that's the other thing, and I wanted to follow up that Santi's question is like, I mean, how do you deal with that kind of feedback? How do you deal with negative feedback?
You sit with what your vision is. Like, I still believe in this vision. It might not be working yet, but I'm not going to just throw the vision out. And this is why I did it. You know, I really wanted to anthropomorphize nature so people felt something. And so I'm not going to give it up. So going back to, why I always have my students like, why do I want to write this book and put it on the wall? Like tape it on the wall so that they don't get lost with all the feedback, because it's a problem. It really is a problem. In workshop, if you get 12 responses back, I've taught classes with 15 people in it. That's a lot of feedback, right? Oh my God. It's like, I didn't think this worked or whatever. Then you have to step back. Like, what do I want to create? And I'm not going to let this one negative thing or 5 take it away from me. I have to figure out how to make it work. So there's a real belief in yourself too that has to happen.
Wow, that's a really good piece of advice. Because I think feedback's always going to be tough.
Yeah.
Especially if you're starting out. I feel like it's something you could definitely grow to understand more and more as you do it, as you keep getting more and more feedback and stuff. Because again, like we have friends who are filmmakers, and they're writing scripts all the time, and they go through drafts and stuff, and they mentioned to us about how sometimes the feedback they get on the scripts they don't always agree with it, right? But it's just one of those things, like you said, just kind of start with the vision, like go back to like what is your vision, and how does that line up with all the feedback you get.
I think
that makes a lot of sense.
I think it's human nature to want to be defensive. But you also have to sit with it. It's like, maybe they have a point. Maybe it's not working, but maybe I can get it to work. So being porous enough to listen, but usually your first reaction is, defensive or anger or sad. It didn't work, and then give it a couple days. It's like, maybe there's some value here.
And kind of going towards closing things off here. I did want to ask one last question regarding In This Ravishing World. Is what do you hope readers get? Like, what do you hope the overall message that you hope to convey through these short stories?
That's a really good question. But no, it's not just to entertain. It's to provoke or maybe entertain ideas, not just entertainment, but to entertain ideas and motivate in some way, some kind of response to the climate crisis, so that the readers moved in some way that you haven't been moved before, to join in the organization, vote for politicians that want to do something about climate change, because it's going to have to come from that level. And we've reached a point where the individual actions at this point are not enough.
Well, for my aspiring authors out there, what would be an advice you would like give them?
I really think trying to think of writing as a practice and think of it as a verb. It's something you do, not your identity. I often don't say, I don't walk around saying, I'm a writer. It's like, I write. So that way, no one can take it away from you. Like if I'm a writer and that's the only way I view it, then when I get rejected, then I collapse. Like my identity got attacked versus it's just what I do. It's right.
Not everyone has to like what I write.
I see.
Yeah, I see. I like that.
That's a very interesting. I've never thought about it.
Think very hard on the show.
I love that.
You've done a very good job of making us really
I think reflecting on many, many things. What is the best way for our community to connect with you, to get the book? Feel free to share where they can get that.
Thank you. Well, you can go to my website, ninaschuyler.com, and then there's links to buy the book.
We also have the link in the description of this live stream and video.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then I just want to give a shout out for bookshop.org. And that's a way to buy books online, and they give some of the proceeds to independent bookstores.
Perfect.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nina.
Thank you.
That's just about the time we have left.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys learned a lot as well. And as always, we will see you guys next week. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's really fun.
I had a lot of fun.
Yeah,
All right.
it's been really awesome. Well,
All right.
all right.
Take
thank
care,
you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.